Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all well. My name is Megan Winch, and I'm one of the recruitment and admissions advisors here at the Said Business School in Oxford. Thank you for joining us for the third session as part of our virtual Oxford MBA Open Day. Before we start, I just want to check that you can all hear me okay. So if you could please type a yes into the chat box at the bottom of the screen. Lovely, lots of yeses coming through. Thank you very much. So this afternoon, you'll be hearing from our amazing careers team in the Career Development Centre. And today we are joined by Dan Kiernan, Career Coach and Employment Engagement Manager. If you have any questions for Dan throughout the session, then please do submit these via the Q&A box below, and we'll do our best to answer as we go along. So over to Dan, thank you.
Okay, good afternoon from Oxford. Thank you for joining us wherever you are and whatever time of day it is for you. So my name's Dan Kiernan. I'm a careers coach here at Said Business School, University of Oxford. I've been here for 6 months now. Before that, I spent 3 years in a similar role at Henley Business School. So I've been a careers professional for 3.5 years in total. Before that, I had a 10-year career in industry. I was in finance. I started my career in a mid-sized UK company doing performance and risk measurement and analytics. Through a series of takeovers and mergers, I ended up working as an operations manager at the Bank of New York Mellon. I managed teams in London, in Edinburgh, in Pune, in India, and in Leeds in the north of the UK. So I had a really great career there. And then I spent 6 years in a fintech startup in London that was connecting investors and wealth managers with venture capital investments. And while I was there, that business grew from being just 5 people to 20. So I've got experience in all sorts of different organizations of different sizes and at different stages. And I really enjoy drawing on my experience to help students. My role is a careers coach. So what that means is I help students develop in their careers. That can be helping them think through their options and make good career decisions. It can be teaching them to articulate their career narrative and position themselves as really strong candidates. And it's also more about the transactional end of careers as well. So helping people format their CVs or prepare for interviews or make applications. So as you can imagine, it's really interesting and rewarding work. And I really love my job. And I'll share this with you. 6 months ago, before I started at Said, I was probably in a similar position to you are now. I was thinking about Said Business School, and I was wondering, would I fit in there? What would it be like? Would I be smart enough to be part of the University of Oxford? I'm pleased to say it's been a really great experience joining the school. There's world-class teaching and research, just like you'd imagine. But everyone is really friendly. There's a great atmosphere around the school. And as well as doing the conventional business school roles, getting people into banking and consultancy and teaching them all of that kind of content, the school does differentiate itself on impact careers, on systems thinking, on teaching students to be global leaders who are going to solve global problems. And you might have seen some of that maybe with the Go-To project that Al Gore presented at. You might have been paying attention to the Leadership in Extraordinary Times podcast and video cast that's been on throughout the lockdown. Or you might be aware of the Skoll Centre for Social Enterprise. And it also has a very diverse cohort. So it's a really interesting place to be involved that I think is a little bit different to other business schools. And so that makes me feel very proud to work there. So you're probably on this webinar because you're thinking about the future. You might be committed to doing an MBA, or you might be considering whether an MBA is for you or not, and whether Said is the right business school. And careers and a career transition or career acceleration, that's probably a big part of your thinking, and it's a big part of that decision for you. and you probably want to understand what career outcomes you can achieve and what support you'll get from the Career Development Centre here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about career transitions. I'm going to let you know what to expect when you're making a career transition, and I'll talk through the Career Development Centre setup, what we offer. I'll answer as many questions as I can, and as my colleague said, please add them to the Q&A, and then hopefully by the end of the session you'll know a bit more about how to tackle career thinking and career transitions, and what support's going to be on offer from the Career Development Centre. So hopefully that all sounds okay. So you may be thinking about your career transition, you may be thinking of accelerating in your current career path, or you might be thinking of transitioning to a new job function, or a new industry sector, or a new geography, or maybe even all three, the famous triple jump that business schools sometimes help facilitate. Or you might still be exploring and thinking about your options, and that's fine too. But whatever stage you're at, you probably realize that there's a difference between what you want your plan to be and what the reality is going to be. And you can see that in our cartoon here. The reality is there's going to be many more peaks and troughs and obstacles to overcome on your career journey. So it's important that you really start thinking about that and understand that and get yourself mentally prepared for that. Make sure that you are ready to stick to the task when you meet some of those obstacles, and draw on the support around you. And that can be your friends and family. It will also be your peers, your fellow students, the faculty and academics, the network, the professional network that you've already built and will continue to build, and of course the Career Development Centre. So I wanted to get that really embedded in your mind as you think about embarking on a career transition. And career transitions can also be quite ambiguous, much more ambiguous than many students often expect. And so I also wanted to give you this little mental framework on the screen here. When things are ambiguous, it's important to try and think about what you can control, what you can influence, and what you need to be aware of, but it's out of your control and it's not something you can influence. So for example, you can control things like your CV, how much time and effort you put into researching companies. You can control how you show up and how you present yourself to people. You can influence how many people in your target industry know you. You can influence how they perceive you through all of your networking activity. You need to be aware of things like COVID and the lockdown and what's happening in the economy and how many vacancies there are, but that's not something you have any control or influence over. So it's important to focus on the things you can control and can influence. And just to give you a tip here, a really common pitfall that I see students fall into, a really common mistake, is they focus very narrowly on the things they can control because it feels tangible and it feels comfortable. So they focus very narrowly on things like CVs or cover letters or application forms. And they worry too much about things like the state of the economy and how many vacancies are out there, even though there's nothing they can do to change that. And they don't pay enough attention to what they can influence. And it's what you can influence, that's really where progress is made. That's when you're slightly outside your comfort zone. You're being stretched a little bit and you're really learning and growing. And that's the productive space where you really increase your chances of success in your career transition. So here's another takeaway for you. Get used to being a little bit outside of your comfort zone. You're in that zone of proximal development. You're working on those things that you can influence. That's going to have a really powerful effect on your career transition. I'll pause there. Have we had any questions come in so far that you'd like me to answer?
Yeah, we've just got the one question from Rashika, and they've asked, are there examples of students going into consulting post-MBA with a social impact lens?
Yes, there are. There are a number of social impact consulting firms. Some of them we are very closely engaged with. Dalberg's probably the biggest name there. And several of those firms have hired from us. So it is possible. Have we had any other questions, or shall I move on?
That's it for now.
That's
Thank
it for
you.
now. Okay, thank you. So if you spent any time researching MBAs and business schools, you've probably got used to seeing these kind of stock images of people doing really exciting outdoor activities, usually some sort of team activity. This one's mountain climbing, sometimes it's rowing or sailing or something like that. So they're a little bit of a cliche, but they're a cliche because they do make an important point. And that is that teamwork does help us overcome challenges like career transitions. And it's going to be important for you to draw on your partners, your fellow students, your family, the Career Development Centre, because together we really are stronger. There's going to be lots of knowledge within your peer group and within your fellow students. There's obviously lots of knowledge in the faculty in the Career Development Centre. And you're going to be building a strong professional network who are going to help you. So even though a career journey and a career transition is a very individual and a very personal thing, something that you have to take ownership of, don't feel like you've got to do it on your own. That's really, really hard. So it is your own journey, but draw on the help of others because together we are stronger. And this mountain climbing analogy is actually a really good one. There are many paths up the mountain and you're going to find your own path. But we, the Career Development Centre, you can think of us like your Sherpas. We can set the guide ropes for you. We can carry some of the equipment. We can show you which tools to use. We can help you set the pace. We can give you a bit of a pick-me-up if you're feeling down. But you're the expedition leader. You're the one who's going to take responsibility for getting to the top of the mountain. So it's quite a nice analogy, even if it is a little bit of a cliche having this image here. Okay, so I'm just going to ask a question now, and you can respond to this in the chat. And it's not a test, I'm just interested in what people think more than anything else. How long do you think a typical MBA career transition takes? How long in weeks or months or years? I don't know if we're getting any answers through to this question.
Yeah, lots coming through, Dan. So we've got 6 months, 1 year, 2 to 3 years, 1 year, 3
Okay.
years.
Okay, good. There's some good answers in there. I like people that are taking the longer view on this. I think that is really sensible. The research says that a typical MBA career transition takes 15 months. Now, I suppose that depends on where you measure the start point and the end point. Certainly, to be comfortable in your new career, it might take longer. And certainly, the actual process of finding a job might be shorter. But 15 months is typical for an MBA career transition. Now, what I think that means for you is that it's important to start early. It's important to think about things like building your professional network, coming to understand your target industry or your target job function. What is it actually like to do that job? What kind of skills do they look for? What kind of qualities are they looking for? What kind of people succeed in those roles? That's going to be a big differentiator, building that understanding. So you won't get hired, typically, you won't get hired for how many marks you get, how high your marks are on the MBA. You will get hired for how well you understand the job role in the sector that you're trying to transition into. And so you've got to start building that understanding right away. The longer you spend building that understanding, the deeper that understanding is, the stronger you will be as a candidate. The other thing that I want you to take away from this 15-month transition is a little bit of confidence. It means you've got time to achieve it. So some people will get a job in the autumn hiring period through structured hiring. Typically, it's banking and consultancy that want those early hires, and they run big recruitment programs to achieve that. But honestly, most students, the majority of students, won't get a job until the end of the program. So once they've finished the MBA program or towards the end of the program. So you've got time to make this transition if you start early. And if you haven't got a job by Christmas or by January, doesn't mean you've got to be stressed or panicked. There's plenty of time still to make the transition. The other thing I'd like to point out while I'm talking about this is if one of your objectives with the MBA is some kind of career outcome, how are you going to make sure that you prioritize that? And there's a reason I ask this. It's because the MBA is going to be very busy, and careers isn't going to be part of the timetable, and it isn't going to be assessed in any way. And so it can be very easy to let it fall to the bottom of your to-do list. It can be very easy to think to yourself, I'm going to put that off and do it later. But actually, to achieve this transition, you need to be doing a lot of work over a long period of time. So you might want to think of it as a hidden module on the MBA. Think of it like this as well. If you need 150 new connections in your target industry, 150 new professional connections to achieve a transition into a new career, well, that would mean probably adding 3 a week for the next 50 weeks. And if you thought you needed 50 hours of conversation with people in the roles that you aspire to do or in the organizations that you aspire to work in, well, that would be an hour of conversation every week for the next 50 weeks. So if you're thinking of making a transition within 12 months, I'm giving you 2 weeks off for Christmas, you need to be doing a little bit every week for 50 weeks. So if a careers outcome is part of the reason you're doing an MBA, then you've got to imagine how are you going to make sure it stays a priority for you throughout the MBA journey. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit now about the structure of the careers program and your journey through the year, but are there any more questions before I get on to that?
We do have quite a few questions. I can ask a couple now if you want. It might be something that you're just about to cover.
Okay.
So one of the questions that came through just asks, when do you advise students start communicating and working with the careers services when they get into Oxford?
Well, when you get to Oxford, I would say as soon as possible. But I'm very happy to talk to people prior to them starting in Oxford. And you can see on this slide here, I'm going to talk about it in a moment, the Oxford Said Careers Academy is an online offering that we make available before the MBA. And so there's a lot of material there for you to work through. But the question is coming from a really good place. It's picking up on the message I'm trying to get across here. The earlier you start, the better. Any other questions before I move on? Should we do one more?
Yeah, we've got one here from Prina that says, what are the various kinds of profiles students go into in the tech industry post-MBA?
They go into all sorts of profiles. Product management is a big one, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit in a moment. But there are all sorts of roles within the tech industry. It's an enormous industry, and the MBA is a very general qualification that means you're able to step into lots of those roles. So yeah, it's very broad, and we do have a lot of students going into tech, particularly at the moment. It's one of the sectors that has continued to hire throughout the lockdown and COVID. Okay, so I'll just talk a little bit about the program and the way the team is structured. So you can see here, this pretty much represents your journey through the MBA from a careers perspective. So as I already mentioned, we have the Careers Academy before you start. That is an online offering. It's a little bit dry. A lot of it is about how to format CVs and write cover letters. There's some exercises to help you do a little bit of self-reflection and think through your strengths and what you've got to offer, and maybe help you decide on the career path that you're going to pursue. But again, emphasizing that point about starting early, if you get all that done before the launch of the MBA, It means you're not going to be pushed for time. You're going to be in a much stronger position during the program. We build on all of that in the launch, which is for the first week or two of the official program. It's also a great time for getting to know you and for you to get to know each other. So it's an important time for building connections and relationships. And then throughout the MBA, in that brown arrow box that you can see there, we're putting on workshops, events, and one-to-one group coaching. Down the left-hand side of this screen, you can see some of the big programs that we run. So the Career Foundations program gives you that foundational stuff about your CV, interviews, LinkedIn profiles, how to position yourself. We have a lot of students who are interested in consulting, and we've got a great consulting team here, and they run a specific consulting development program for those guys. And then the talent development program helps you fill in some of those skills gaps you might have identified. It might be things like presentation skills or facilitation skills. So we help you fill in some of those gaps. And then we've got a really extensive program of co-curricular activities that also enhance your career development. So you can see several there about finance and investing, going to help you get into a career in finance. Impact investing and impact lab, helping people who are interested in those impact careers, and also the entrepreneurship pathway. So really, whether you're going into consulting, finance, global industry, or even something else, there's going to be some co-curricular offering to help you. And it's in this period during the MBA where you do feel that pressure to focus on the academic work, make sure you're keeping up with all the assessments and the examinations, etc. That's where sometimes people can let careers fall to the bottom of their priority list. So that's where I want you to really think about how you're going to focus on sticking with the career development aspects of the MBA. And it's also useful by then, if you can, to have made some decisions about the career path you're going to pursue, so you can be really targeted about which ones of these programs you're going to engage with. And then capstone, that carries on once you've completed the MBA. So you don't just complete the MBA and we just forget about you. As I said earlier, many of our students, this is where they find jobs in this time. And so the capstone program helps you with the career support post MBA. And this is how the Career Development Centre is structured. So we have one team specifically for finance. They're a great team. They're very experienced industry practitioners as well as career professionals. A specific team for consulting, another big area for business schools. And then almost everything else falls into the global industry team. That includes things like healthcare, tech, we've already spoke about. And then because of this focus that Saeed has on social impact, we have dedicated resource in careers for people who are interested in social impact careers. And that's actually my role. I look after that. So wherever you're headed, there's a team dedicated to you that's going to support you. And down the right-hand side of this slide, you can see the format of those activities. Very common to any business school, and as you go through other business schools, welcome presentations and marketing, the career services are going to offer very similar things. What I draw your attention to is the one-to-one coaching sessions. Every career journey is unique, it's very personal, and it can be very difficult to think and reflect on where you're headed and what your next steps are and how you're going to position yourself. And so I believe the one-to-one coaching sessions are a really great way of helping you work through some of that. And I see students sometimes make a mistake. They'll go to one coaching session and think that perhaps one 30-minute session is going to answer all their careers questions. And that's probably not going to be true. It's much better to form a relationship with a coach and see them at regular intervals and reflect on your learning and the progress you're making and have a really good relationship with that coach. That's where I've seen the most success with students who engage with the careers service. I'd also draw your attention to our industry advisors. We've got a great alumni network and we've got lots of really brilliant people who are connected to the school And of course, some of those are industry advisors that we make available to you for specific industry-specific careers advice. So that's a really great offering for you guys. Okay, shall we take a couple more questions? Then I'll run through the 3 teams in a bit more detail, and then we'll just open it up to Q&A in general.
Yep, so we've got a great question from Sahil. When you get an application wherein the applicant is pursuing a function and industry shift, what is it that you look for in regards to the success of the applicant making that double jump using the Oxford MBA?
So what a recruiter's probably going to look for is your transferable skills. So if you're coming from a completely different area and job function, you've got to think through, what have I got? What can I already do? What experience do I have that's going to be relevant for the new job role? And transferable skills, if you think about your skills in quite an abstract way, that's a good way of thinking about it. It can be communication skills, it can be client handling skills, it can be leadership skills, it might be project or program management. The important thing is not to just sit back and think about it conceptually. That is important, but it's not enough. The important thing is to network with people in the function and the industry that you want to transition to. Talk to them and come to understand what skills they value, what experience they value, what are they expecting from people who are transitioning into their sector, what are they expecting from candidates. Those conversations will tell you what's achievable, what kind of level you can aim for, which companies or which parts of the industry might be the best ones for you, and they'll tell you how to shape yourself as a candidate. So that's really the best way to prepare yourself to make a double or even a triple jump. Shall we take one more question before I move on?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Dan. I have a question from Michael asking, what's the approximate career conversion rate for students who are targeting consulting? And he is asking for students across the school's program, so the 1+1, the MBA and the MBA, but we might just be only able to speak to the MBA here.
Well, I'm not quite sure what you mean by conversion rates. If you look at the employment report that we posted on the Side Business School website, that will tell you how many of our students go into careers in consulting. Now, I don't know, out of all the students we have in our cohort every year, how many of them wanted to go in consulting and didn't achieve that. So I haven't got that figure, but you can look at the employment report to understand how many students in general are getting into consulting. The other thing I would say is don't focus too much on those cohort wide statistics. It's much more personal than that. You need to think about you and how you're positioned, and you need to learn about the consulting industry if that's where you're headed. Do that networking, talk to the people in the industry and work out where you're going to fit. That's much more important than just thinking about we get 30% of our students into consulting. Okay, I'm going to just talk through the 3 teams in a little bit more detail, and then we'll do an open-ended question and answer session. So the global industry team, you can see it summarized here. It's basically everything that's not finance or consulting. Very popular sectors at the moment are tech, energy, in particular clean energy, and healthcare. So you can probably guess that from reading the news. I'll point out 2 important things here. One is those new activities. So the data analytics and digital marketing pathway. It's a really great co-curricular program that teaches you things like SQL skills and data-driven decision making. So that's fantastic for many of the organizations in global industry value those skills. And the product management roadmap, that's another co-curricular activity preparing you for that specific product management function. It culminates in a competition, and lots of students really enjoy that. And that is a function that seems to be very popular with students at the moment. The other thing I'd say about global industry is there is not much structured hiring. So there's not much of that on-campus structured hiring in the autumn term for global industry. If you're going into global industry, it's much more likely that you're going to be hired through an experienced hire route in the spring or summer, or even after you complete the MBA program. Financial services, we've got a really great team looking after students who want to go into finance. As I said before, they're experienced industry practitioners. Key things to point out here is finance isn't just banking. We also have a lot of students who go into asset management, and fintech has been a big and growing area for our students as well. And the team have done a lot of work in that area over the last few years. Finance Lab is probably the big co-curricular program here. That's where you learn all of the Excel financial modeling skills. And it actually, again, culminates in a couple of competitions. With that one, you're competing against other business schools, so it's really fascinating. Finance, in particular, the big investment banking roles, they do a lot of structured hiring. That does take place very early in the program in the autumn. And so if you're thinking of going into investment banking, then you need to start your career development activity really early. And then finally, consulting, a very popular area. We've already had a couple of questions about it. Consulting breaks down into 4 major pathways. You can see them here. So it's very useful if you start educating yourself about the differences between these pathways, and start thinking about where your interest lies, and maybe even make a decision about which one of these pathways is for you. And then the big co-curricular program in consulting is the Consulting Development Program. That's open to everyone. It's a really fantastic interactive program. Takes place very early, so you actually start accessing it before you start the MBA program. And that's again because consulting is one of these industries where there's a lot of structured hiring that takes place in the autumn term. So that's just a very quick run through the 3 teams and the structure of the Career Development Centre. I hope that's given you a bit more information about how we work. I hope I've also given you some ideas for career transitions and what to expect. And with that, I'll just take questions as they come.
Brilliant, thank you, Dan. So we've got loads of great questions coming through. We'll just go from the top here. So we've got one that says, could you throw some light on private equity recruitment in Oxford? What companies recruit for private equity roles, and are internships useful?
Several private equity companies recruit from Oxford. It's slightly different every year. I would emphasize again, don't just focus on the companies that come on campus or who are connected to Oxford. Because if you think of the whole universe of potential opportunities for you, and you only focus on the ones that are coming to Oxford, then you're not casting your net wide enough. So it's much more important that you do your own networking and cast your net much more widely. And then, yes, of course, internships are really useful. It's a great way of showing employers that you've got some of the skills that they're looking for, and it's an extended interview. So if you can get any kind of short-term work experience, both before the MBA, during the MBA, and after the MBA, that always helps with recruitment, particularly in competitive sectors like that.
Awesome, thanks, Dan. I have a question here. Do companies come to hire on campus? And if yes, how does it work? What's the process and how long does it typically take?
So lots of companies do come onto campus, and they'll participate in careers fairs, they'll deliver webinars, they'll deliver employer presentations, they might host coffee chats or some kind of workshop. There isn't a specific process. When they come on campus, that's a chance for you to interact with them and get to know them, maybe make a few connections and start to impress them. But then you're going to go into their pipeline, whatever their pipeline process is the way forward. And the hiring times, it's really a huge range. So if it's a structured hiring program run by a consultancy firm, then you might have a job by Christmas. If it's a small boutique, they might be much slower about the hiring process, and you might have to stay in touch with them through a 9 or 10 month period until you complete your MBA, and then you get hired. So there's no hard and fast rules about that one.
Question here from someone currently working in the entertainment industry but looking to make a move into consulting. Could you give some insights onto which part of the MBA program that would benefit me the most?
Well, the Consulting Development Programme is the obvious careers co-curricular that you should be focused on. When it comes to choosing the electives you're going to take, you won't have to make that decision until a little bit later on in the programme, so you'll have plenty of time to study and think through which ones are most valuable for you. And my big suggestion is talk to people in the consulting industry, identify what they're looking for, identify where you've already got some of the transferable skills they want and where you're going to fit in and what skills they want, and then pick your electives based around that. Another thing I would say is, pick things that you enjoy, pick things that you know you're going to enjoy and do well at. Let me be perfectly honest, when it comes to recruitment, again, it won't be the electives you chose or the marks you got on the MBA. It's going to be the connections you built, the experience you've got, and how you position yourself as a candidate that's going to be the difference.
Thank you, Dan. We've had a few questions about internships. I'm going to combine a couple of questions here. Basically, could you elaborate on the internship process a little bit more? Are they just in certain areas, or are they kind of across all different industries? And is it common for students to do them outside of the UK? And can they do more than one? Sorry, that was a very, a very complex
That's fine.
combination.
It's a great area to focus on because it is so important. So we have an internship for credit program. For you to have an internship that qualifies for that program, you have to find it yourself. You have to secure it yourself. It'll be a competitive application process, just the same as going for a job. You have to have found it by the middle of June, and that date actually got extended this year because of all the lockdown, etc. And then you collect 20 credits for completing that internship. It needs to be a minimum of 8 weeks, and it needs to be at MBA level. So that's the internship for credit program, which is obviously great. It's a great way to do an internship, gather some work experience, and work towards your completion of your program. But there's nothing to stop you from doing an internship alongside or after the MBA program in a completely private arrangement that's not for credit. You can do internships overseas. That's not a problem at all. For the internship for credit program, as long as they meet the criteria, it doesn't matter where they are. This year, most of our internships, I guess 90% of them have been remote because of the circumstances we've been in this year with the lockdown. And I also think, if you can do part-time work experience or other forms of short-term work experience, that also helps build your CV. Anything that's showing that you can work in the target industry, work in the industry you're trying to break into, is going to be really powerful and really helpful for you when it comes to looking for work.
Thanks, Dan. So you briefly mentioned the employment report that's on our website at the moment. Mm-hmm. Question from Elizabeth: how easy is it for international students to get a job in the UK?
Well, again, I would say anything I'm going to say here is going to be a generalization, and it really depends on you and your personal journey and what you've got to offer and what kind of job you're trying to achieve. So it's all individual, but in general, you've got one obstacle that you've got to overcome, which is the visa sponsorship. And that can be frustrating because there's no source of information that says these companies sponsor and these companies don't. I know every year I see some students who apply for jobs that say they don't sponsor visas, and international students get sponsorship. And of course, every year I see students apply for jobs and then get told halfway through the process, actually, we don't sponsor visas. So it is a big frustration for international students. The way to handle it is, again, through networking, through the companies that you're really interested in. Start forming a relationship with them, get to know a few people in the company, let them get to know you, and then pop the question. Then you say, do you hire candidates that require visa sponsorship? If you do it at that point, you'll get an honest answer, and you will have hopefully already demonstrated a little bit of your value. So if they're going to have to sort of bend the rules a little bit to sponsor a visa, because it's not something they typically do, they're more likely to do it.
Great, thank you. Another question on transition. So someone has said, how best can you prepare for a transition from consulting into strategy and operations roles in industry? Are there any particular electives you would recommend?
I wouldn't recommend any particular electives. And again, you don't have to make that choice right now. There's plenty of time for you to think through that choice. So the best preparation will be talking to people in the target job functions and target areas, thinking through what they tell you and what you learn from them, and then using that information to inform how you structure your MBA. But again, what's going to be really important is the connections you build and how you present yourself, more than the electives you choose in the MBA.
Question here, Dan, what is your view on opportunities to work in London given the COVID outcomes in 21-22?
Oh, you're asking me to make a prediction. London is a global financial centre. It's a global city. It's got a huge startup scene. It's got a big media and design and creative industries sector. So I think London's always going to have opportunities. I haven't had any sense that London is suddenly going to not be as dynamic. I haven't had any sense that suddenly it's not going to be a big centre for growth. Now, obviously, I don't know what the future holds, but if anywhere is going to be a success after the COVID and the lockdown, it's going to be open, big international cities, I think, and London's one of those.
Thank you. So these are two interesting questions. So obviously when people are applying to the MBA, we try and ask that they give us some really nice insight into their post-MBA career plans and why they think the MBA is right for them. So we do have two questions asking, do we actually expect people to set their exact career path prior to applying? And then someone else has said one of the reasons they're considering the MBA is to discover where her career can go next. So are there any workshops and resources aimed at finding that right role for you?
Okay, yes. So the answer is yes, there's plenty of resources to help you think through where you want to go next. And again, that's where I'd emphasize the one-to-one coaching. That can be really powerful for that kind of activity and that kind of thinking. I don't expect anyone to have made a decision about where they're headed pre-MBA, but I don't work in the admissions team. I don't know how much they're assessing that. In terms of achieving a career outcome, the earlier you make the decision about where you're headed, the easier it's going to be to achieve your outcome, just because you're giving yourself more time to work towards the outcome. But we're all human beings. Sometimes we can't make up our minds. Sometimes we procrastinate. Sometimes we think we're going one way and then some new information or new experience changes our direction. And sometimes we do just take time out to explore our options. I think all of those things are fine. So from my perspective, it's absolutely fine if you haven't made decisions. My job's easier if you have, but it's more interesting if you haven't. So from my perspective, I don't mind. But I'm not going to speak for the admissions team. I don't know if they expect to see really solid thinking about where you're headed post-MBA.
Great, thank you. We have a question here from Sai that says, do you have people going into corporate strategy through a leadership development program post-MBA, such as the Amazon Retail Leadership Program?
Short answer to that is yes. Amazon's actually one of our biggest recruiters. My boss, Tom Lawrence, he's the head of the global industry team. He's actually ex-Amazon. He worked in the recruitment function at Amazon. So that's one place where we have a particularly strong relationship, and they do a lot of recruitment from us.
Great, thank you. Someone has asked, when you say social impact sector, what sort of companies and jobs do you mean exactly? And that consulting, finance, global industry all sound similar and familiar. But social impact sounds new, and they're curious what sort of jobs that would entail.
Yeah, it's a bit nebulous, isn't it? It's a bit of a strange concept. So impact careers, which is my function, it covers NGOs, non-governmental organizations, international NGOs like the UN, aid and development institutions like that, social enterprises and social ventures. So these are small businesses that are set up particularly to deliver some kind of social benefit, but they're a for-profit organization. It can also include purpose-driven businesses, so things like benefit corporations, if you've seen the B Corp movement, businesses that are big businesses and they're for-profit ventures, and they're not necessarily all about delivering a social benefit like a social enterprise would be, but the way they're going about their business is, much more thoughtful about all of the stakeholders, rather than just being focused on profit. An impact career could also include an impact role in a conventional organization. So for example, a few weeks ago, I was talking to the head of sustainability at BP. So, BP you wouldn't think of typically as being an impact career, but you could have an impact role within an organization like that. So impact careers is a very big, broad catch-all for a lot of career options that really do interest our students, where they're going to have more purpose and more meaning and try and do more good in the world through their career.
Okay, Felix has asked, do students normally enrol in multiple co-curricular programs?
It varies. You can enrol in multiple. There's nothing wrong with that. The only thing I would caution you against is overstretching yourself, because you'll have a big academic program. You'll want to do lots of socializing and enjoy being in Oxford as well. So you just don't want to overload yourself. And that's why I was saying, if you can make some career decisions early, that helps you select which co-curricular programs you want to engage in. But it's very personal. I mean, some people, they just, they don't seem to need any sleep. They've got a really big appetite for all these things. Some people are more targeted.
Thank you. A couple of questions about people with a little bit more than the class average of work experience. So someone has over 15 years of work experience and someone has 10 years of work experience. Do you see that as a roadblock, or are there different services for candidates with this longer work experience?
It's absolutely not a roadblock. It's a benefit. The more experience, the better, usually. There aren't different services. So you may find, if you've got that much experience, maybe some of the workshops aren't for you. Maybe some of the structured program recruitment doesn't appeal to you. But certainly the one-to-one coaching can help anyone. And I was helping a guy today in his 50s. So the one-to-one coaching is tailored for anyone. And then the other thing I would say is, even if you've got 10 or 15 years experience, sometimes people have a lot of experience, but they've not spent much of that time thinking about career transitions and how to position themselves in the job market and how to produce CVs. So there's still a lot of benefit in accessing the careers service. But I certainly wouldn't think of it as a negative. I think it's a massive positive having experience.
Thank you. So there's a few questions from people who are not from necessarily business backgrounds. Would you say this has an impact on their overall success, specifically going into entrepreneurship pathways?
Well, for entrepreneurial pathways, all bets are off, really. Being a startup, being an entrepreneur, I worked in a startup, as I said right at the start of the presentation. All sorts of people do that and succeed. All sorts of people do that and fail. I've seen lots of people with corporate backgrounds move into startups and struggle because they're just not familiar with it. And I've seen other people with non-corporate backgrounds go into startup and entrepreneurship and be a success because they've got the right mindset, they've got great ideas, and they've got the right kind of work ethic. So for the entrepreneurship pathway in particular, that's very, very personal. And it's very much about your mindset and how hard you're going to work and how good your ideas are. I don't think having a non-traditional business background should hold you back. I suppose it depends on what you think of as success. So, if success is getting one of those top trophy jobs at BCG, Bain Consulting Group, or something like that, then potentially the non-traditional background could hold you back. But if success is just making a career transition and doing something different, that's absolutely within your grasp. And again, it's all very personal. It's your own journey. It's how you can present yourself, how you can position yourself as a candidate, what you've got to articulate. I know people that have done history degrees and gone into investment banking. I know people that have done arts degrees and literature degrees and gone into consulting. So it's no limitation, particularly here in the UK. People don't tend to think in terms of undergraduate and background. It's much more about what you've got to offer as a candidate.
Thank you. And on the arch note, a couple of questions about what exactly is impact investing, with a follow-up on, is art investing a really niche area, and is there any room for students to move into that area?
So impact investing is investing in organizations, in ventures that are going to have some sort of social impact. So there's a lot of small impact investors based in emerging markets where they're for-profit organizations. They're investing in for-profit organizations that are delivering some sort of social benefit. It's a very popular career pathway going into impact investing. And as a sector, it tends to favor people who already have some investment background. You certainly need to develop the hard skills of financial modeling and putting together a deal and an investment. But instead of just investing to make a profit, you're investing into businesses and organizations that also deliver some sort of social return. Art investment is a very niche area. There's absolutely nothing to stop you going into it. But as well as understanding principles of portfolio construction and investment, I imagine you'd also need a very good understanding of the art world. But getting into it would be no different to anything else. It would be about networking, finding out what they're looking for, and positioning yourself.
Thank you. Great question here. So how do you think that our career centre stands out from other business schools?
Well, I think it's the focus on impact. I don't see that in many other business schools. It's also been really pleasing for me over the last 6 months since I joined to be working alongside industry practitioners. So they're not just people who have built a career as a careers coach or a careers professional. We've got people who've come from marketing, executive education, banking, finance, consulting. So those are probably two differentiators for our Career Development Centre.
Thank you. A couple of people have asked if they want to get into a certain industry, should they join the clubs and the labs and the things that are geared towards that industry? So if someone's interested in finance roles, should they do the finance lab or join the finance club? If someone's interested in consulting, should they do consulting electives? Basically, how deep should they go?
Well, broadly to that, the answer is going to be yes. Particularly the co-curricular activity and the extracurricular activity, because that's something that demonstrates your motivation to get into that area, and particularly if you don't have those skills already. So finance lab, for example, if you've already worked as an investment bank analyst, you probably have most of those skills and you don't need to acquire them. But if you haven't done that work before, then it's a really great way of getting those skills on your CV and being able to talk to them and talk about them to a recruiter.
Just following on from that question from Elizabeth, could you give some more details about the Consulting Development Programme? What kind of project, what's involved in it?
There's a big emphasis on learning about case interviews, which is one of the big aspects of consulting interviews and consulting recruitment that you may not come across in other fields. So we do a lot to help people get prepared for that. There's a lot about developing the consulting mindset, which is really thinking about problem solving and thinking analytically about things. There's a lot about handling clients. Consulting is all about working with clients and finding solutions from them. So there's a big emphasis on that. And there's a lot to help people think through which of the 4 consulting pathways is for them. It's all delivered in a blend. So there's some self-study, there's some group work, there's some online work, there's some lectures. So there's something there for everyone. And it's a very democratic program. So there's no limit on the number of people who can participate. Some of the other programs do have a limit and you have to apply and be accepted. But the consulting development program is wide open. The person who runs it, Sarah Pratt, she's an ex-consultant. She's got loads of energy. She's a really great coach. And she sort of created this program from scratch. So it's her baby, and you know, it's a really great thing to be engaged with.
Awesome, thank you. Somnath has asked if you could please shed some more light into companies and roles preferred by graduates going into global industry. They say, when you say global industry, it encompasses everything not finance and consulting. So could you be more specific?
So it does encompass all of that, and we support students wherever they're going, whatever they want to do. What we know is popular right now has been tech. That's been popular both with employers who want to recruit and with students who want to go into that industry. Healthcare has been another growing area, and also clean energy, one of the ones I mentioned earlier as well. There's been a big focus on clean energy and climate throughout this year's programme, and so that might have influenced the number of employers that were engaging with us and where students wanted to head. So those are some of the popular industry areas. People go into general management roles, operations management roles, sales roles, and product management is one of the big roles as well I mentioned, where we have the co-curricular program that supports students into that. So there's a lot of activity happening there. What I would say is you don't need to just be drawn along by what your peers are doing or what you see from employers coming on campus. You know, whatever you feel you want to do, we'll support you with that. So, you know, make your own decisions. Don't be influenced by other people.
Lovely. So I'm conscious that we're coming to the end of the session now. So I think we'll have just one more question. Final one, is there any specific support for students who are hoping to accelerate their career progression rather than making it a career transition?
Yes, absolutely. There you might want to focus on the talent development program and picking up some of the skills that you might need to accelerate in your career alongside the knowledge you're acquiring through the MBA. There's also some things to think about how you're going to get promoted, how you're going to get noticed, what direction you're going to take your career in. Even if you're accelerating within the same pathway, there's probably still going to be some decisions to make. Are you going to be a manager? Are you going to be a technical specialist? Do you want to travel, or do you want to be based in one place? And so again, coming back to the coaching, we can really help with those career accelerations as well.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much, Dan. That was excellent. So that concludes our final session for today. Thank you to everyone who has joined us. Sorry if we didn't get through all of the questions today, but Sam's just posting in the chat now our email address. So please do give us an email. The inbox is monitored every day and one of the team will get back to you. We also have a Q&A session with our recruitment admissions team, as well as a taster lecture next Friday, the 17th of July, as part of the Oxford MBA Virtual Open Day. So I hope you're able to join us for that too. Yeah, in the meantime, please get in touch with us through the email address that Sam's just popped in the chat now. Thank you again to Dan. I hope you are all staying safe, and I hope you all have lovely weekends ahead. Thank you very much.
Great to see you all. You can find me on LinkedIn. And I'm happy to answer any other questions there as well. So you can connect with me on LinkedIn. If I didn't answer your question today, that's fine. But great to have so many questions, and enjoy the rest of the day.